Rugby League, the greatest game in the world. Since the first Great Britain tour in 1910, it's been the ambition of every player to tour Australia and New Zealand with the famous Lions. This is the story of just some of the great players who have achieved the honour, the games in which they played, and the flood of memories behind their achievements. Members of the British Rugby League Lions Association of former tourists to Australasia meet every year for their annual reunion luncheon. Invitations are restricted to members and their guests, many of them outstanding players who never toured. Over 600 gather to meet old friends and recall the great games and players of the past and discuss the merits and prospects of present and future Lions. Stars from different eras have one thing in common: they all wore the British shirt with distinction. Jeff Gunny won the MBE for his services to the sport, Alf Burnell, his old Hunslet pal, one of the true characters. And what about this duo, who would have been dynamic in any age, Joe Egan and Ken G of Wigan? This year's Lions chairman is Jack Wilkinson. He first toured in 1954. The legendary Mick Sullivan appeared in a record number of tests. All have retained their interest in the sport. Some, like former Hull fullback Arthur Keegan, now report on the game. Arthur Bassett was the first man to score a hat-trick in a test match, and Gus Risman, he's assured of a big welcome. He toured 3 times. Nearly every club is represented. Humberside has had so many tourists down the years, and one of them went as a player and coach, the formidable Johnny Whiteley. Has there ever been a greater winger than Billy Boston? You'll see him in action. And as for the newer boys, well, like David Hobbs and Brian Noble, the reunion is just as significant. They've not played with names like Rhodes or Hardisty or Greenall, but they know the illustrious names well enough, and they certainly know 2 of their Bradford Northern predecessors. Harold Young at 88, the oldest surviving Lion; Trevor Foster, one of the finest forwards ever to grace the game. Already the talk of great tries has begun, but typical of a sport that's renowned for its respectfulness, the members honour the memories of old friends and playing colleagues in total silence. The George Hotel in Huddersfield was the venue of the first meeting of the tour committee. They're briefed to organise the first Lions tour in 1910, this following the visit by the first Kangaroos 2 years earlier. Jimmy Lomas of Salford was an inspiring captain. Billy Batten went too. He was probably the highest paid player in the game's history. This is how son Eric remembers the legendary figure.
I saw him play twice, but the best memories is what he used to tell us. He was picked to go on this 1910 tour. And as soon as he got off board the ship, they kept saying, "Wait till you meet old Payasha." Oh, every place we went, "Wait till..." Anyhow, they were picked at test. And he saw this old Payasha, 11.5, centre. He thought, well, I won't kill him and all if he kills me. Anyhow, old Payasha, he used to hit you with the ball and straight over the top, and we're off. Well, my dad, he went and met him, but Hope hit him. So he'd not do it next time. Next time he went up, Billy went up. They carried Hope off, come back, 14 stitches. Went up other wing, he'd had enough, Hope. Oh, they said he was a good one. He must have been, before First World War, he was £14 a match for 4 years. We was internationals in 1938. £3.10 or £3.50.
In 1911, the Kangaroos won the Ashes for the first time, but in 1914, the Lions, led by the brilliant Harold Wagstaff, regained the Ashes in what was to become known as the Rorke's Drift Test. The side, badly hit by injuries, was reduced to 9 men for a short period, but won a famous victory. Wagstaff and Batten are remembered by Test winger Alf Ellerby.
Harold Wagstaff was the type of man who gave it a lot of thought and did the building up of certain sections of the game. Billy Batten was a man who always took 2 or 3 men to stop him, which means that the opposition are coming out of position to take him. And he was so good at it, he never went round the place, straight through them, which meant that taking 2 of the opposition out of position was a wonderful thing then. It was how's your father and all over.
The 1920 Lions, led again by Harold Wagstaff, lost the Ashes in Australia, but this was to be the last series defeat against the old enemy for 30 years. A notable tourist was Douglas Clark of Huddersfield, a wrestler of some renown. He was a member of the 1914 and 1920 Lions, and is seen here wrestling in the Empire Championships. Britain regained the Ashes 2-1 in 1922, and Wakefield scrum half Jonty Parkin led the 1924 Lions to a similar result. And in 1928, with this team, repeated the feat. Jim Sullivan, on his third tour, captained the 1932 side, and Joe Thompson of Leeds was also on his third tour. The Ashes won once again 2-1. The brilliant St Helens winger Alf Ellaby, seen in action kicking ahead here in the 1930 Wembley final for his team's only score, and then on one of his typical runs, scored the fastest test try on record and remembers the day well.
We kicked off actually, and it happened so quickly. It's one of those things, they got possession and immediately came through. Jim Sullivan, I don't know where it was only me, left of 4. Why, I don't know. And I thought, now Mick Masden has this ball, a great player, he must pass it. I mean, 4-1, even if the man with the ball scores, it's bad football. So I thought, it flashes through your mind in a second. To go straight at him, knowing he'd pass it, he must pass it, and then come away at the same time, you see. And it finished up in my hands. And then it's 75 yards to go, and pop it over the line. It happened in less than half a minute or so. Not bad. I know after the match, the reporters came round, they said, well, Alf, I can't believe what's happened today. He said, how do you think it happened? I said, well, God was on my side. On the Australian newspapers, Alf Ellaby says God was on his side.
Jim Brough led the 1936 side, hoping to repeat the 3-0 whitewash from 1933. A crowd of almost 64,000 was at Sydney for the first test. In the end, Australia won comfortably, but Great Britain certainly had some good moments in the game. The crowd certainly appreciated that. And Harry Beverley from Hunslet was a 2-try scorer for Britain. That was the first coming from Tommy McHugh's pass. McHugh from Widnes. But the Australians were brilliant in those days at times, and swift handling saw them over for their first try. The West Wing man Ridley. Other tries were to come as Britain tried to soak up the pressure, but found the Australians just a little bit too quick on the day for them. Centre Dave Brown, he scored 2 tries and 4 goals. He was the youngest Australian captain at that stage, and what a nonchalant kick as well there. Brown in the end, 2 tries, 4 goals then, and he was only 23 at the time. Australia's other try scorer was Pearce, and for Great Britain, well, they just managed one other try, again from Harry Beverley, which was converted by Hodgson. At the end of the day, though, Australia had gone on to win by 24 points to 8. With Australia 1-up, it was hardly surprising that Dave Brown led out an unchanged team for the second test at the Brisbane Cricket Ground. Britain's selectors did make changes though, with Jim Brough, who'd missed the first test, returning to lead the side from full back. And it was the British who enjoyed the better of the early exchanges, coming close on numerous occasions. The first try followed a kick through from Emlyn Jenkins of Salford. This isn't it, by the way, but it gives you an indication of the way the British were attacking at the time. The try scorer was Alan Edwards. There was no goal from Martin Hodgson, but Britain at least were in the lead by 3 points to 0. But then Australia did score a sensational try, and it came from the schoolboy Archie Crippen. No relation to the infamous Doctor, by the way. He intercepted 60 yards out and, roared on by the Aussie crowd, went all the way to beat Brough for pace and finish up under the posts. It was an easy goal for Beaton. There had been heavy rain before the kick-off, making the going sticky, and this really did seem to suit the British. They had an overwhelming advantage in the scrums too, where Tommy Armitt did a terrific job. He actually won those scrums 51-25. Yes, 76 scrums in all. That's almost one a minute. The Australians had some good attacking moments, but the British defence generally held firm. In fact, Britain monopolised play for roughly 3/4 of the game. Some of the Aussie handling wasn't too clever in those days, was it? Well, the Australian crowd of over 29,000 had paid receipts of £3,908, but as the game wore on, they became a little bit desperate as to the outcome. And it was the British throwing the ball around well who began to look menacing in the closing stages. Here the Australian fullback holds on and then they clear their lines quite well. But this was a good day for Great Britain. After holding off the Australians in this attack, they came back themselves. And once more it was Jenkins kicking ahead. Again it was Edwards. You can't quite see him, but he pounces here to score, pushing Crippen away. 12-7 with Risman's magnificent conversion. And the series all square. So all to play for at Sydney. The Australians made a couple of changes. Gus Risman, one of 5 Salford backs in the side, became Britain's 3rd different captain in the series. The conditions should have suited the Aussies, but handling errors and some astute kicking from Jenkins made sure that they pinned the opposition back. Well then, a moment of history. Ray Steer becomes the first man to be sent off twice in the same series, and Jack Arkwright of Warrington went with him. Worse was to come for Australia. It's Britain who register the first try of the game. This is one bounce that young Crippen didn't get right, and Barney Hudson is in like a flash for the first try. Then the crowning moment, a kick from Risman, and Stanley Brogdon of Leeds hares for glory. And coming up, another superb goal from Martin Hodgson, right from the touchline. Just look at this. That's an absolute beauty. The Aussies did everything but score. Again, tigerish defence by the likes of Nat Silcock, Harry Beverley and Martin Hodgson, typifying the British game. By now the British were sensing the Ashes were on their way home, and indeed their triumph came in the same score as the previous Test match, 12 points to 7. By the time Vic Hay got a late consolation try, it didn't really matter. Britain's triumph had been built around a big pack, which included Martin Hodgson.
I was 6'1.5", and I was 17 stone 3. Harry Beverley was 6'3" and 17 stone, and Arkwright, he was 6'3" as well, but he could have been any weight. You couldn't tell whether he had any weight, muscle on or what to do with Arkwright. And so, I mean, they took some licking, you know. And I think, and another thing was, 3rd test in 36, there was prop forward, Quinn and Mick Madsen, and they played, he'd never hooped before. Just imagine, a fellow never hooped before playing in a test match. And I think Tommy Army said to her, right, Mick, you can have this, and that was last scrum, and that was the only one he got. So, I mean, they were chasing us all the time, and it was easy. I mean, I wouldn't say fast, but I could stop them at world. I mean, the fastest man in the world was, if I tackled him twice, he wasn't fastest man in the world when I finished, after 2 tackles.
Gus Risman led the 46 Lions, and Trevor Foster remembers the unusual build-up to the tour.
There was some doubt after the war about teams going to Australia, particularly because of space on the ships, passages to Australia, because people were being demobbed, and all shipping was held for that particular purpose. But one of the ministers from Australia, one of the cabinet ministers, came across and made a special appeal to the House of Commons, and that actually happened. And this particular minister said that we must have a British team out. We've just gone through 6 years of war, and we are ready for sport, and we've got to have a British team because they set the old place afire. And we were put on an aircraft carrier. I got the position of being trainer, in the small way we did have it, to take them every morning on the boat deck, on the flight deck, where you could almost play a game of touch and pass.
absolutely huge. And I am sure we landed at Fremantle with one of the fittest teams that's ever gone out there, because we were able to exercise. We played a lot of a particular game called deck hockey. And funny enough, there were 12 priests, Catholic priests and brothers, who were going out to Australia and New Zealand for their first posting. And they had a team in this hockey tournament that we had, and they called themselves the Sky Pilots. And they were very, very good.
Another tourist, Eric Batten, like his father, actually used to jump over opponents.
You don't practice it, you just think I can do it, and you do it. I can remember playing in third tense. I said to myself, now if we get this ball, I'm going to do this. We got the ball, the gave me it straight over Kennedy, went to full back, I coins there, long length of field, gives him the ball. Dally Messenger were there, he come on and I was coming down and shooting and he says, I hadn't scored the try, but I'd made the try. And that was one of the best moments I ever had.
The match in Sydney, housing its first test for 10 years due to the intervening war, was drawn 8-8 in front of a crowd of 64,000. Willie Horn of Barrow had scored the first try as the Lions roared again. Then 19-stone Frank Whitcomb from Bradford Northern roared as well, all the way to the line. Slow-motion film had come into use for the very first time, and Ron Bailey gave a dummy in slow motion to fool the British defence. This try pegs the score back to 6-5. It was always going to be close, and the next try came from Lionel Cooper, later to star in Huddersfield's great post-war years. He romped over in the corner to save the day for Australia, an honourable draw. Arthur Clews played in all 3 tests in 1946, but he first saw the Lions 14 years earlier.
I don't remember much about it, but I remember more about the 36 side, really, because I was a bit older then. I was 12, and Vic Hay used to be my idol. He was an Australian bloke. He played that day, and although they got beaten, I thought it was a wonderful game of rugby. You know, the place was packed out, and the old man was a bit upset, you know, but because the Poms had beaten the Australians, you know, but I never realised that 10 years later I'd be playing against all these blokes, you know. In the third test in Sydney, I got sent off having to go poor old Gus Risman. Doug Phillips was belting everybody. Waddy was flying out of the scrum over me head, and I said to the referee, Tom McMahon, I said, Jesus, keep an eye on that pommy bloke there, that Phillips, he's belting everybody about the place. Waddy flew over head twice in the second row. Nose was broken, somebody else was copping him. He was giving some stick out with Big Doug, big rough Welshman. So I thought I'll get stuck into these pommies myself, so I had one to go, and then Gus got the ball, and he was at full back. I went at him with a stiff arm, and being an old time, he'd been there 32, 36 and 46, he had a bit more now than me. I was only a 22-year-old kid, and he ducked, and I missed him by about a yard. If I'd hit him, it'd have still been going, I think, but I mean, I missed him, and the referee said, get off, Clews. I said to Tom McMahon on that to appear on the Monday night before the disciplinary committee, and he said, I said, you knew what was going out there, Tom, that pommy bloke. Phillips was giving everybody stick. I mean, their eyes were coming out and broken noses and boof, and what he flew over the head twice. He said, yeah, I sent you off for missing, you mug, he said. He was the referee. If I'd have whacked him, I would have been all right, I think.
2 outstanding members of the international scene were Wigan captain Joe Egan and his club prop Ken G, who remembers his selection in 1946 and what it meant to him.
Well, it meant a lot. Beside, I'd just come out of hospital with stomach trouble. And the thing his doctor said to me, he said, you want 3 good months in the sunshine. Like I was home and listened to this coming out of Miley show, not television then, 26 players. Well, he's going a good way there. I thought, I'm going to miss this sunshine. Anyway, it come out and like a new man. And it did me good. It was glorious sunshine in 1946. Especially in Australia. Unfit a bit of football into, so I was made champion.
The 46 tour meant missing the cup final at Wembley, but G made amends with 2 winning medals, and he scored in 1951. Joe Egan, a great hooker, remembers the value of Ken G.
They always say who could never got the ball. They always say at Wigan, Ken G got the ball, or it was at Bradford, Frank Whitcomb got the ball. or Tommy Bradshaw got the ball, putting it in, or Don Ward got the ball, putting it in. But there was any time when they didn't get the ball, then Hooker got blamed then.
Ernest Ward had taken over as captain for the visit of the 1948 Kangaroos. He led his side out at Headingley for the first test which Great Britain was to win in a close encounter by 23 points to 21. Yes, your eyes aren't deceiving you. In those days, the Aussies used to frighten us to death with their own pre-match war cry. Believe it or not, the words of this little Aboriginal ditty, roughly translated, meant something like, "We mean to be peaceful, so don't disturb us." They must have been joking. The British weren't joking. In the second test at Swinton, in front of a big crowd at Station Road, Albert Pimblett of Warrington went in for one try. Bradford's Ward was as meticulous as ever. He seemed to take an eternity to place the ball. But his painstaking approach paid off. And Britain were on their way to a 16-7 win achieved despite a late Australian try from centre Horrigan. And so to Odsal, where else, that famous gangway ending the players' long, long walk from the dressing rooms to the pitch. 43,500 were there, all cheering local hero Ernest Ward and his team as they went in search of a whitewash. And first blood to Britain. Jerry Helm from Warrington turned the course of the game, sending Ward streaking for the line. And Ward himself converts from the touchline. By the way, please don't adjust your sets at this moment. Centre Lulham is about to score Australia's first try in colour. By the time Duncan Hall goes over for the second Australian try, we've gone back to black and white. Back too came Britain in the second half. Martin Ryan of Wigan linked up from full-back to send Stan McCormick of Bellevue Rangers in. Great Britain now rejuvenated. Soon they were combining again. And with the play close to the line, watch out now for George Curran. Here he comes, and that's the first of his two tries. Arms aloft, and the best try is still to come. Ernest Ward's sleight of hand would have bamboozled anyone. The Aussies are certainly flummoxed as Dickie Williams dashes into the distance. Britain win the game 23-9 and the series 3-0. Harry Bath, seen scoring here for Warrington, was one of many outstanding Australians never to wear the Kangaroos jersey. But like the legendary Warrington winger Brian Bevan, who scored a world record of nearly 800 tries, he did wear the green jersey of the other nationalities. Bevan was a one-off. The least likely looking sportsman is hard to imagine. Bald and tied together with bandages, so they said, Bevan had a quite glittering career. A character, just like Arthur Clews, who was once accused of biting an opponent.
Eddie Waring, the next day he used to write for the Victorian in those days, and there was headlines on the front page of the Victorian. When man bites dog, that's not news. When dog bites man, that's not news. But when man bites man, that's clues.
Ernest Ward led again in 1950. And who were the 8 Wigan players? A memory test for Joe Egan.
Well, there was Martin Ryan, full-back, Gordon Ratcliffe on the wing, Jack Hilton on the wing, Ernie Ashcroft centre, and Tommy Bradshaw scrum half. I'm going to miss somebody, aren't I? Ken and me, and Jackie Cunliffe, yeah.
One of the great centres of the period was Wigan colleague Ernie Ashcroft.
All the wingmen playing around that period would all want to have Ernie Ashcroft playing centre for them, centre to them, because they always felt he was the greatest centre to give them the ball at the right time and not give them the ball if they're going to get thumped.
And here's a clip of rare film to endorse those words. The match is against New South Wales on that 1950 tour. After the initial break, there's the play the ball. It's Joe Egan here. A suspicion of a knock-on maybe. Then Ken G drives on. Now watch how Ashcroft uses his wingman Jack Hilton as a foil, tricks Clive Churchill, that accomplished fullback, and gets a fine individual try. On that tour it went to the last test. Here's Jack Hilton.
Oh, that was actually played in a mud bath. As a matter of fact, it was very difficult to play football at all in that. We all, at the end of the day, we all looked like bronze statues. You couldn't define the opposition from who was playing who. And it was practically impossible to play rugby as we know rugby, the passing and all that sort of thing. And don't forget in those days too, the very heavy balls we had. Heavy kit too, as a matter of fact. When you're talking about 1950, you're talking about when material such as shorts and all that was made out of the same materials you used to have kit bags made of in the army. I remember the big lad that I played against, a fella named Roberts. He was a 6'3", probably 16 stone guy. He probably got one pass, probably in the second half, and the only pass he did catch was the one that he got in at the corner.
At the end of that series, Australia had won the Ashes for the first time in 30 years. In 1951, France made a first ever tour to Australia, and their fast, exciting, open style of play, always a hallmark of the French, proved very popular, attracting large crowds. Their fullback and goal kicker, Puy Gobert, was one of the tour's stars. It was altogether a highly successful innovation in World Rugby League, and France beat the Aussies 2-1. The early 50s also marked a new era in rugby league, with games being televised. Eddie Waring, a regular visitor on post-war Lions tours, is seen here during commentary at the Kangaroos game at Keighley in 1952. Dickie Williams led the 54 Lions, and they were the first team ever to fly. Ken Trail, who'd also been on the last tour to sail in 1950, remembers the journey.
I'd got him in a plane once, and that was to Isle of Man, or Jersey or somewhere like that, and everybody was a bit scared, and I always remember it was a Constellation, and where they're doing it now in 22 hours flying time, it took 3.5 days. And we stopped in Rome, and we stopped in Cairo, got off the plane, had a wash, a shower and a meal, got back on the plane. By that time 1 or 2 players were complaining of their ankles swelling.
Great Britain had retained the Ashes with a 2-1 home series win in 1952 and were in buoyant mood by the time of the traditional pre-tour photo call at the Sydney Cricket Ground. Men like Lewis Jones, captured then by the camera, can today see the pictures hanging on rugby club walls wherever the game is played, a marvellous way of tickling the memory. One of the off-the-field highlights was meeting Dally Messenger, the legendary Australian player of the first tours to England 50 years earlier, who kicked off in a country game. Ernie Ashcroft captained the tourists in the first test in Sydney. The teams were introduced to the usual posse of dignitaries, and 65,000 settled down for a long-awaited duel. The British team included 5 new caps: Lewis Jones, Peter Jackson, Ray Price, Jack Wilkinson and Nat Silcock. It turned out to be a strange sort of game. For much of it, the sides were level. Provan scored first for Australia, amazingly Pidding missed the simplest of goal kicks. But then the tourists hit back quite spectacularly. They badly needed a try, and when it came, it certainly had the few British fans in the crowd on their feet. Ken Trail's reverse pass got the Australians on the hop. Dave Valentine made the break, and at his shoulder there was Nat Silcock, away on a glory dash to the line. What a try! Australia were quick to respond though, as if stung into action. They carried the game again to Great Britain. And it was Keith Holman's pass that enabled O'Shea to cross near the posts. So it was backs to the wall again for the touring team. They did manage to repel most of Australia's raids, and they were to come again themselves like real good uns in the next few minutes. Jerry Helm and Ray Price were involved in the build-up, and there was Phil Jackson to go over. Real cause for celebration, and justifiable too. And further joy from the boots of Lewis Jones as he pops over the conversion, 10-10. And it was 12-12 with only 25 minutes to go, but suddenly the game ran away for gallant Great Britain. They'd soaked up a lot of pressure, but were somehow helpless when Duncan Hall threaded his way through to dive over. In a similar move, Australia took the game right out of Britain's reach. One man was held just short of the line. But there was no stopping Pidding as he crashed over. Australia really on top now, and a flowing passing move is about to tear Britain apart. Just watch the ball move now. Right along the line. And at the end of it all, there's a try for winger Carlson. He tries to get in as close to the sticks as possible to help his goal kicker Pidding, who ends the day with 8 goals to go with his try. He sensed déjà vu as the ball is again whipped along the line. But this time, centre McCaffrey checks and then finds an alternative route to the try line. It's turning into a rout now, and Ken McCaffrey has a field day against the tiring tourists. This is his 2nd try. It's Australia's 7th. And the scoreboard tells the story. Britain even lose points at the final whistle. But that's the correct score. It's Australia 37, Great Britain 12. The second test at the Brisbane Cricket Ground was a free-scoring affair. Britain introduced 3 debutants to international football, including wingers Billy Boston of Wigan and Terry O'Grady of Oldham. Huddersfield's Jim Bowden came into the pack to take on the confident Aussies. It was Lewis Jones who collected the game's first points with a penalty, but it was Australia who scored the first try. And what a score it was. That man Carlson again the hero. A lovely sidestep, a kick ahead. Then a kindly bounce, and Carlson leaves Boston and others trailing in his wake on his way to the line. Hitting his job was an easy one. It's a complicated scoreboard, but it gives the facts. Australia lead 5-2. This was the age of the kicking duels between rival fullbacks. Here Lewis Jones and Clive Churchill just keep pumping the ball to one another. Never mind about the other 24 players, why not have our own game? And so it went on, and on, and on, until someone managed to intervene. That little battle over, Britain had another psychological boost when Lee's Charlie Pawsey found a gap to score. They didn't kiss Charlie, not that he'd have wanted them to. Nor did they kiss Lewis Jones when he converted, but Britain were in front, 7-5 the score now, and things were looking good. The Australians tried to hit back, as they always do. But coming up now, another magic moment in the history of Lions tours. Billy Boston, chosen for the tour after only 5 club games for Wigan, gets the ball in midfield, and he's on his way to his first test try, one he'll certainly never forget. Another goal from the Golden Boot as Great Britain extend their lead. The Lion is rampant now, and it's turning into a reversal of the Sydney Test. The next try comes after an Australian mistake. They heel the ball from the scrum and everything looks good for them. But suddenly the passing move breaks down, Ashcroft feeds Dickie Williams, and the little man is scampering over. What a captain's try, and it came at the perfect time as well. And more inevitable points from the toe end of Lewis Jones. 19-10 it is. It's looking good, and it's looking as though the series is going to be squared. In fact, Williams' boys run in the next 19 points. Lewis Jones breaks a test record with 20 points, all from his right boot. Boston gets another try. There's one for Jerry Helm as well. The Aussies are shattered, although they do conjure up a fine score. Clive Churchill's attacking genius pointed the way, and a good bout of passing ends with Keith Holman getting the touchdown. But it's almost time for the final whistle. The Aussies know the score, the British know the score. And when that final whistle comes, it's a sweet victory for the British. They've been the best on the day, no argument about that. They've won by 38 points to 21. It's a crushing margin. If you're an Australian fan, the scoreboard doesn't really make very happy reading. The players troop, or in some cases, hobble off. But there are real smiles back in the dressing room, you can be sure of that. The British team has given absolutely everything. It's been a memorable first test for Billy Boston. And it's a Great Britain victory that owes a great deal to the deadly accuracy of the Welsh wizard Lewis Jones. Back to Sydney for the decider. Both teams rely on experience, and 67,577 see Great Britain take the early initiative. A good break by Terry O'Grady is halted temporarily, but there's good support and a classic first try for Wigan's Ernie Ashcroft. At this stage, things are really going Britain's way, and they must have felt the Ashes were in the pocket when Dickie Williams plundered the first of his 2 tries. But the Australians are a resilient lot, and they showed their redoubtable side. There's no questioning the blistering pace of West centre Watson as he fairly skips away to pull back 3 points. No doubt about that try, but the British lads weren't too happy about the next score. Again, Watson caused problems down the middle, but when Wells stretched for the line in Prescott's tackle, there was a hint of a double movement, a controversial try all right. Lewis Jones showed a glimpse of his magic, weaving this way and that. But what a pity here that Billy Boston just loses his footing. Especially as when Australia came back, Pidding didn't lose his way, and he crosses for the crucial score in Australia's 20 points to 16 victory. The Ashes regained by Australia. Britain had had bad luck with injuries though they had discovered a major talent in Billy Boston.
But we lost the likes of Drew Turnbull. He played perhaps 1.5 matches throughout the tour. Frank Castle, another wingman, he was out. And we relied solely on the 2 youngest members of the party, Terry O'Grady on one wing and Billy Boston on the other wing. They were both 19, 20-year-olds. Billy had been a surprise choice. Billy had played about half a dozen games only of rugby league. He came out of the Corps of Signals together with Phil Jackson and was selected for the tour. Billy had the makings, but at that stage of the game he'd been solely taken for experience.
But the series had been lost. There was consolation for Great Britain in the first ever World Cup in France. The selectors made a number of changes, bringing in fresh faces, and this had the desired effect. The British played fluent rugby league, running in spectacular tries, and climaxed the tournament by beating France in an exciting final by 16 points to 12. There were tries for Rose, for Jerry Helm, yes, he was still a valuable member, and 2 for the lead centre Gordon Brown. Jimmy Ledyard kicked a couple of goals. And after Brown had rounded things off in capital fashion, scoring here in the corner, Huddersfield's David Valentine, that rare thing in rugby league as Scott, had the privilege of being the very first man to lift the massive World Cup. In the 1956 Test Series, Great Britain took a 1-0 lead on a quite filthy day at Wigan's Central Park. The rain didn't seem to affect the British boys though, and it wasn't long before Oldham's Alan Davis was sliding his way over. The players soon became almost unrecognisable, but I can tell you that was Jeff Stevenson flinging out the long pass. Mick Sullivan here on the wing, and it's his clever little chip ahead that opens the way for Barrow's Jack Grundy to score. Then a moment to treasure for Wigan fans. Billy Boston gets there, eventually, almost a triple movement. But nobody seems to care, and why should they? And before long the big man was waltzing through again, his second try. And Britain were on their way to capping a 21 points to 10 triumph. The goal went over too, and the crowd were really getting their money's worth at this stage. The try scoring hadn't finished either. One to come, and it went to the other wingman, Huddersfield's Sullivan. Australia actually won the second test at Odsal 22 points to 9. But they did have to give second best in the decider at Swinton. Sullivan's name was again on the try sheet, and so was Billy Boston, his try really clinching the series. It was a famous win for Britain, and their captain was Alan Prescott. He was again in charge in '58 and proud of his players.
Now, such was the nature of this team that we had a wonderful team spirit. We had two international loose forwards, and one was playing second row, so it just showed the quality of the team that was picked. One centre we had was Alan Davis, a chap I've always regarded as probably the finest centre I've ever seen. And I've played against him many, many times and played with him many, many times. But he couldn't get his place. The two centres and Phil Jackson was my vice captain that day, well, for the tour rather, and he couldn't get his place. And our two centres were Eric Ashton and Jim Challoner. And they really were the ham and eggers, if you understand what I mean. They were the second choice. But there was no second choice in that team. You were all first team men. And that proved to be the greatest thing, you know, the greatest team I've ever played with, yeah. Every man played Ike Southard on the wing, Mick Sullivan on the other wing, Mick. You could have played him in the pack, he'd have played well. You know, real men of iron.
First test, the British had a mixed start to the second in Brisbane. David Bolton had to go off with a shattered collarbone. But inspired by Alex Murphy's magic in only his second test match, the British scored first through Warrington's Jim Challoner, and they were to go on to an epic victory. Skipper Alan Prescott broke his right forearm in the 3rd minute, but still flung out his one-handed passes in a show of bravery to rival Horatio Nelson. With Vince Corellius moving out of the pack to cover for Bolton, Great Britain were effectively reduced to 4.5 forwards. But the old Bulldog spirit came to the surface, and Mick Sullivan raced over for a famous score. Eric Fraser couldn't convert that one, but still the tourists led at half-time, when their dressing room resembled a casualty clearing station.
Eric Fraser burst a blood vessel in his elbow. Challoner had done his shoulder. He could barely lift it. Dave Bolton had gone off, I'd broke my arm, and Vince had ricked his back, so there was 5 dead men.
But there was nothing dead about this British performance. The lion-hearted Johnny Whiteley from Hull gave a towering example, storming up the middle and giving to Murphy, whose blistering pace seemed to petrify the Australians. Even more electric was the crescendo to a try that would have graced any game as Workington's Ike Southwood finished off in the grand manner. Eric Fraser fittingly added the goal to make it 15-2. The Aussies were stung to retaliate. They had marvellously creative players like Keith Holman, Rex Mossop later to become a commentator on the game, and their stirring leader Brian Davies. Incessant pressure was bound to pay off against such handicapped opponents sometime, and sure enough the British line was eventually breached after holding out for almost an hour. Prop Marsh flung himself over, and then when Clifford improved that try it was 15-7, and the battle now really on. The ensuing minutes were to bring back memories of the famous Rorke's Drift test 44 years ago. Prescott with his one arm set a captain's lead, and the longer the game went on, the more the Australians made mistakes. Time after time they were repelled, with Alex Murphy's fleet of foot constantly carrying play away from the British try line. It was rugby league of heroic proportions from the Lions. And there was an even stronger sniff of glory when Whiteley and Brian McTeague opened the way for Southwood's second try. There it is. British tails really up now, and the goal from Fraser against all the odds, it's 20 points to 7. Even then the Brits were asked to show more reserves of resilience. There were some anxious looks when a perfectly executed scissors movement got Carlson in at the corner. 10-20. But no goal for the nervous Aussies. And there were deeper frowns still when the Aussies pieced together another flowing move, and this time the tourists feel they might be in danger of wilting. Winger Diamond squeezes over in the corner, and it's 13-20. Again, no goal, much to the great relief of Prescott's team, desperately now in need of a final lift. It came, predictably, from the marvellous man of the match, Murphy. In a flash he scampered 30 yards, and that's the killer blow. Murphy deserved to lie down, no doubt exhausted, but nonetheless ecstatic. Fraser's 5th goal made it 25-13. Still a few minutes to go though, and there was time for one last show of defiance from the crestfallen, rather disbelieving Australians. Not from that move, but from this one. Holman's name is that on the try-sheet. Clifford's goal was academic. The thin white line held firm for what transpired to be one of the greatest victories in Test match history. The scoreline, 25-18, told so little of a remarkable story, from Prescott's broken arm in the 3rd minute right through to the final whistle. And to this day, Alan Prescott is proud but magnanimous towards the deflated opposition, and especially their captain, Brian Davis.
And you know, at any one time he could have ruined my career, just by snatching me out. He knew it had gone. You know, but he could have snatched it, and well, the pain would have had to go off then. And he never once did he try. He's one man I've always wanted to meet after that.
Heroes like Brian McTeague of Wigan emerged from this tour. Johnny Whiteley had proved himself a rampaging forward. And Alex Murphy of St Helens, even to his own surprise, began a glittering Test career.
I always believed, because I was only 18, that I would play a second choice, because Frank Pitchford was a very, very good scrum half. Jeff Stevenson had cried off, so that automatically put me up one. Well, I couldn't believe that I would get him before Frank Pitchford. And Alan came in and said, you've been picked on Saturday. I never played international football in my life. And he said, you're playing against Keith Allman. You know, and I didn't know who Keith Allman was, you know, I wasn't really bothered like, but you know, when Alan introduced me to him, we went to a race meeting and he said, meet the best scrum half in the world. And before he time to say anything, I said, that's very nice of him to say that before he's played against me. But I don't think he took that too kindly, because when we played on Saturday, he kicked me all around Sydney Cricket Ground. And I made the biggest mistake of the lot. Because I was 18 and didn't understand international football, I tried to run through him instead of running away from him. And that's just what he wanted. He absolutely annihilated me. It was the worst time of my life, the most important time, and the worst thing I've ever done. I went back to the hotel and we lost. I took a rollicking from the captain, went upstairs and started crying. But it wasn't finished then, because I thought, well, that's my international career finished. And then Alan came in, wasn't happy about what I'd done on the field. He knew I could do better. Told me what I'd done wrong, but never let me forget what I had done. You know, he kind of tore a strip off me, and we just took it from there. And I promised him that if he ever got back in, it'd never happen again. And I don't think he did. I don't think he ever tackled me after that.
Under the inspiring management of that unique character, Tom Mitchell from Workington, Great Britain went on to clinch that series 2-1, winning the final Test in Sydney by 40 points to 17. Prescott's team came home triumphant. 4 years on, Wigan's Eric Ashton, who starred when the Aussies were beaten in England in 1959, was captain down under.
And if you look at past records, you can only win matches, and we did that in Test matches. I mean, we took on New South Wales, Sydney. We played all the big games, which the two sides don't do today. And we were successful in the first Test, 38-12, something like that. I'm not quite sure of the score. Won the second Test at Brisbane, 17-10, and the series was over. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we should have been the first side to win 3 Test matches in Australia, because we're leading something like, I don't know, 17-11, and this Beattie's got an injury for Australia, and he hags Turner on, and Turner flattens him, and he's sent off, and Mick Sullivan flies in off the wing, and he's sent off, and we're down to 11 men. After a 17-11 lead, I don't know. I think they kicked a goal and made it 17-13, and right in the last seconds, dying seconds of the game, I'm not sure it was Irvin or Carson scored in the corner. And of all people, Irvin, I don't think he'd kicked a goal in his life. The hooter went, it was, the game was all over, and he kicked the goal off the touchline. And we lost 18-17. We should have been the first side to win 3 Tests, no question about that. That was a good side. It was a well-balanced side in as much as forward-wise. We had people like Matt Tye, great ball player, and a back row second to none, on that series anyway. A back row that I've never seen play as well. All 6-footers, all 15-stoners, Brian Edgar, Dick Huddart and Derek Turner. Derek Turner had a knack of being able as a forward, which he's not, which probably is unusual. There's been forwards before that could kick a ball and gain your ground and think a bit in the middle of the park, and 2 second row forwards that could run, decoded long striding play. Brian Negger could sidestep on it in a bit. That was a nucleus of our side, was the forwards. And we had, in my opinion, and I've never seen, a pair of half-backs. May have been better half-backs in the history of our game, but certainly never half-backs with the ability they had and the pace they had in David Bolton and Murphy. I mean, Alec and David was exceptionally fast. And if you think of a good pack and a good pair of half-backs and power on the wings in Boston and Sullivan, I mean, we couldn't fail, really. In fact, we was that successful and Australia was that annoyed that that was the last match of the tour when they beat us 18-17, and officials and press was saying that they didn't have enough St George players in, and had we played St George it would have been a different game. And out of the blue we rearranged a game with St George before we left for New Zealand. And we'd sort of come out of training then relaxing for New Zealand, for the New Zealand trip. And we was called together and we trained. And you can tell how the interest in that game was. There was 68,000 on a Wednesday afternoon to watch Great Britain versus St George. I mean, that was how keen there was to watch that game, and we ran out 35-5 winners. I mean, that was the strength of that side. They could just turn it on. The harder the game, the better they played.
Britain couldn't have asked for a better start to the series. They won the first test 31-12 with Ashton and Sullivan getting 2 tries apiece. It was then on to Lang Park in Brisbane, and the stage was set for another Billy Boston spectacular. The Wigan wonder was not to be stopped that day. His 2 tries were the cornerstone of a 17 points to 10 triumph that really clinched the Ashes earlier than even the tourists probably thought was possible. Australia didn't really have many moments of joy in this game. One of the few ones came from the boot of Keith Barnes. That one of 2 goals that he kicked. The score at that stage 10-5, and Billy Boston looked for all the world as though he was going to get 3 tries in the match. But watch out now for a tremendous tackle that's going to prevent him. There's Boston away, and everyone in the crowd thought that the hat-trick was on. One man had something to say about it though, the captain Barnes, and that really was a superb saving tackle. Britain's still very much in the ascendancy though, and it's a typical bit of Alex Murphy magic that crowns their day. The Aussies bought the dummy, and for the 4th series in succession the British boys came out on top. Yes, that really is Alex Murphy. The team all had squad numbers, so he's number 15, Mick Sullivan there at 23, and Billy Boston, rather unfamiliarly, in the number 3 jersey. A lot of the British victories were built around the amazing goal-kicking ability of Neil Fox. It really was extraordinary how points accumulated around the great man from Wakefield Trinity. Here he is, about to pop another 2 points onto the score. Things going very much Great Britain's way at that stage, 15 points to 5, and the Australians desperate to get back into the game and into the series. Murphy continued to weave his magic, but there were anxious moments for Great Britain when Murphy went down injured. The Australians were only too happy to see the back of him. He'd plagued them in 2 test matches, but this was to be the end of this game for Alex Murphy. He's carried away by the team's coach, Colin Hutton. That might well have inspired the Australians, but it was Great Britain who came back for the next score. The ball is heeled from the scrum, and there's Ashton. 2 more points. Things were looking good for Great Britain, but they did have to reorganise with Alex Murphy back in the dressing room. Wakefield Trinity's Harold Poynton on his debut moved into the scrum half position. But 17-5 it was when Poynton made his first real influence on the game. Here he is now. At the play of the ball, it's Poynton who jinks, kicks ahead, and the Australians start to dither a little bit here. There's more than one fumble, including one behind the line. Poynton pounces, juggles, and turns the ball back inside for Mick Sullivan. Well, he's over, but the referee disallowed the try. Perhaps if Mr. Casey had been officiating these days, he might have allowed it. Things were still going Great Britain's way, but then the Australians, with that brilliant centre Reg Gasnier, came back into the game. It was looking a little late for them. Not since 1928 had Britain won the Ashes down under in the first two tests, and Arthur Summons, the little scrum half, still had something to say about that. He went over for what turned out to be the last try of the game. The Australians, though, at this stage knew that it was a forlorn hope. Just the goal kick to come from Keith Barnes, and that was of statistical interest only. 17-8 the score, the margin far too great with only a minute or so on the clock. Over it goes, up go the flags, and up go the arms of the Great Britain players. They've won the series in the second test match. Well, the Australian crowd on the pitch, no doubt stunned, but they could still appreciate a fine Great Britain performance. And your eyes weren't mistaking you there. The final score, which will come up correctly in a moment, was 17 points to 10. There it is. And the British players, people like Jerry Round and Bill Sayer, Dick Huddart, Brian Edgar and Laurie Gilfedder, in addition to the players already mentioned, looking for their captain Eric Ashton, who's perhaps got lost in the throng. And the Australians no doubt happy to get lost in the dressing room, but there is Ashton, and hoisted high for perhaps the greatest moment of his playing career. Victory then for Great Britain, although the third test still to come in Sydney. Jack Wilkinson of Wakefield, making his third tour, has vivid memories not only of the series but of the subsequent visit to South Africa.
I didn't play against the Australians in the tests, but I was there as a good viewer, and the team played absolutely wonderful. Won the first two tests convincingly, and in the second test, in the third and final test, when the job was virtually all over, we knew we'd won the Ashes there. There was a disputed decision on the try at the end of the game that put the Australians, I think they just edged in front by a couple of 3 points. We did about 4 weeks in South Africa. They was trying to get the game going out there, and just prior to us arriving after the Australia-New Zealand trip, Wakefield Trinity had been out there playing 1 or 2 games, and we played against, not club teams, we played against the South African 13 with great names there of Charlie Nim and 1 or 2 of the top fellas that came over here, South Africans, and ex-rugby union players. We played in Durban, Johannesburg and up in Pretoria. And some of the games were quite good, and it looked as if South Africa were going to really make it, because if you remember in the 60s there with some Freddie Griffiths and Lake and quite a lot of the Von Vollenhoven and all those that came over, it looked as if rugby league was really going to take off in South Africa itself.
A tremendous tour with so many memories of characters like Alex Murphy.
Oh, Alex Murphy, yeah, well, Alex, one of the greatest there. Little Jack in the box there, fellow there, you never knew where they were going, but a great scrum half. One of the best I ever either played against or with was Alex. Super footballer. Fox, well, Neil Fox was just unbelievable. Neil Fox was a genius. He was a big man who had a good football brain, fantastic turn of speed for his weight, and the points just seemed to amass around him, both touchdowns and goal kicking. This fellow was absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. Eric Ashton, yes, Eric Ashton was a marvellous captain, a good motivator. We didn't have coaches to the extent that we have nowadays there, but it was all done through the players themselves. And everybody rallied round because that's what counted. I mean, I have my own opinion there of coaches there. I mean, a coach isn't always on the field with you, whereas the captain is. And this is where all the moves used to start in those days.
In 1966, Harry Poole of Leeds was chosen as tour captain. He took with him a very strong squad on paper, which included Frank Myler of Widnes, who looks back now on his first tour down under.
The main problem was Harry Poole. Unfortunately, Harry, a great player, he picked up an injury early on in the tour. Before the first test match, he had a bad knee. And of course, poor Harry never played in any test matches, you know, which certainly we missed a player of his calibre, you know. You know, for the captain of a tour not to play in a test match, and certainly one of our better forwards, it was a blow to us.
Poole's absence from the first test gave the Aussie press a field day. The critics gave the tourists no hope. They'd lost 4 of the build-up matches, so when Ian Walsh led his side out, the Australians were full of confidence. The Lions were led by Brian Edgar, a tourist for the 3rd time, and included in his side were 3 new caps. Hull's Arthur Keegan, a last-minute choice at full-back, Bradford Northern's Ian Brooke in the centre, and the diminutive St Helens scrum half, Tommy Bishop. The vast Sydney Cricket Ground again attracted a huge crowd of just under 58,000, and by the time the teams came eyeball to eyeball, the atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation. The usual pre-match pleasantries did little to relieve the tension, and with 5 new caps in the green and gold colours, there were a lot of butterflies out in the middle. Play had been underway less than 5 minutes when Great Britain conceded the first penalty, and in a very kickable position. Keith Barnes didn't disappoint the partisan crowd. Australia were in front. Not for long though, that fine forward, Cliff Watson of St Helens, swatted off the opposition and then sliced like a knife through butter for the first try of the series. Britain were in front. Handshakes all round, and coming up, Arthur Keegan's first test goal. The man in the number 2 jersey makes the score 5-2. The scoreboard a little confusing perhaps, but there was nothing confusing out in the middle, and the Aussies had a good spell on attack. Britain's defence working overtime at this stage, and the Australians tending to rely a little on the boot of the reliable Barnes. He again eased the home team in front. That just one of 2 further penalties in the first half. But the British did come tearing back, perhaps when least expected. They set up a good position, and when the ball comes out, it's little Bishop dropping a good goal, still in the days when it was worth 2 points. Britain's next try owed much to the art of Alan Hardisty, the man from Castleford nipping through a gap and herring to the line without a finger laid on him. Keegan's goal really rubbed salt into the wound. There was even better to come. Again the forwards doing the foraging. And watch out now for a brilliant individual try coming up from Barrow's Bill Burgess. First the sidestep, the handoff, and then a great run to the line. He dives in like a swallow, and the British are singing like thrushes. 17-8. There is still time for an Australian fight back, which includes a try from standoff Banks. But the Aussies knew it wasn't going to be their day. That made the final score 17 points to 13. The scoreboard reflected a Great Britain victory. The home team, so highly fancied at the start, trudged off disconsolate, knowing they now had to win twice to take the series. Again, the Australians had been stunned. Their players looked as though they couldn't believe it. Neither could the fans. There was almost silence for the Australians, but the cheers were for the heroes of the Great Britain team. What a memorable day it had been for all of them, and especially for Captain Brian Edgar. 1 up with 2 to play, the British brought in Frank Myler, Jeff Wrigglesworth and Bill Ramsey for the Brisbane Test, and it was Ramsey who made the game's first break. The Aussies had 2 new caps on show, but they were still looking to the likes of Keith Barnes and Graham Langlands to square the series. This was a fierce, uncompromising, at times even savage affair, with few running chances for the backs. A day when goal kicking would be of paramount importance. And indeed it turned out to be a match of traded penalties. Barnes took advantage of an early misdemeanour, and it's 2-0. This was certainly not a match for the faint-hearted, the tackling quite ferocious, and it soon became evident that this match would be won and lost on penalties. The next one went to the touring team, and Keegan made no mistake. The British were reduced to 12 men when Ramsey was dismissed early in the second half. They were to pull ahead though, when Bishop was obstructed quite clearly. And again, Keegan extracts full revenge. 4-2. But soon the British were committing a scrum offence. And again, Barnes proved sure-footed, taking the Australians back all square, in a game though totally lacking in spectacle. This turned out to be fullback Keith Barnes' last appearance in an Australian Test shirt, but he seemed determined to go out in a blaze of glory, leading many a raid from full-back. Still, the worry was there that one more penalty might settle the issue. And it was the British who gave it away. Perhaps appropriately though. 3 men had gone offside and Barnes had the chance to crown his career. It was just 4 minutes from time. Barnes didn't take long about it and wins the day for the home country to square the series 1-1. An uninspired game though by any standards, the first trialist test since 1933. Again the issue was to be settled in the third and final test. For it, the Australian selectors introduced a giant of a young man from Balmain, who was to make a colossal impact on the international scene, Artie Beetson. First blood though went to the tourists. Ken Gowers of Swinton, who like Bill Burgess was following in his father's footsteps in playing for the Lions, was entrusted with the goal kicking. And he didn't let his side down when he got his first chance in only the 3rd minute. 2-0. The British were relying on the same pack that played at Lang Park in that bruising battle, but they found Beetson quite a handful, and they were torn apart when Australia forged ahead with 2 tries before the half hour. Beetson it was too, who opened the way for that great servant from North's Ken Irvine. The popular winger went in for his 10th try in Anglo-Australian tussles to pass Billy Boston's hitherto record tally. A marvellous moment for a marvellous player. And Beetson it was again, who engineered the next try, making himself an instant hero. It was Beetson's kick through, which Johnny King chased like a greyhound after the hare, with due reward. The all-ticket crowd of 63,500 were lapping it up now, sensing the Ashes might well be retained after the triumph in England in 1963. And when Les Johns pumped over a kick, the kangaroo's tail was really up. The Australians were boosted even further when Cliff Watson, that rugged St Helens man, was sent off, supposedly for kicking that fiery Aussie centre Peter Diamond. Diamond, who'd received 3 lectures, stayed on. A masterly interception by Alan Hardisty, was there ever a greater exponent of that particular art in timing, put Britain in with a chance again. The Aussies were left in his slipstream, and Gowers tacked on the goal to leave Edgar's side a mere point in arrears. But they were soon to be hit by one of the most debatable tries in the history of test matches between the two countries. Johns had broken clear of the British defence, no doubt about that. He was caught from behind by Ian Brooke. But was that really a try? Yes, said the referee. Irvine had picked it up all right, but surely after spilling it in the first place, he was allowed by the referee to regather and dive over for that try, which the tourists couldn't believe had been awarded. Now, with the luxury of action replays for the very first time, we can study the incident in more detail. There's the ball, and there's the first pass. So good running from fullback Johns. Now that surely had to be a knock-on. But Irvine goes over, and I think even he can't believe it when the referee says that's a try. The British lads certainly can't believe it. Here it is again. Good running from fullback Johns. But there had to be an error there, and an error on the referee's part. Tommy Bishop's language, hardly that perhaps of a man with an ecclesiastical name, but on this occasion perhaps justifiable too. Referee Pearce of New South Wales partially atones by awarding Great Britain a penalty. And Ken Gowers makes no mistake, but the stuffing has already been knocked out of Great Britain by that Irvine try. The next score goes to the green and golds. Number 8 Lynch proves unstoppable on his way to the line, just by a shirt. And at 14-9, the Australians seem to be coasting away with it. The fans are happy, and they're happier still when goal kicker Johns makes it into a 5-pointer. And the margin now is 7 points. The British don't go down without a fight though, and perhaps they got their own bit of luck. A few moments later, Alan Hardisty, number 11, kicking ahead, and the referee, perhaps still mindful of his earlier decision which turned the course of the game, awards Hardisty a penalty try when he's obstructed. At 16-14 it looks like a grandstand finish, but after another initial foray by Johns, who had a grand game at full back, it's Irvine in storybook style who completes his hat-trick with a legitimate try and ends the British resistance. The jubilant Australians retain the Ashes in a hard-fought series, and their captain Ian Walsh of St George is carried shoulder high from the field. Defeat had been no disgrace, and after the major events of the tour, the Lions again went on to play a club side. And as shown here, they weren't too downhearted. Some really classic moves against Balmain, and it ends in a fine try for Swinton's Alan Buckley. Right under the sticks. And there was another good try to come from the Great Britain touring side. This time from the scrum, the ball is moved along, and on the outside after the kick, Bill Burgess of Barrow leads the sprint, and with the aid of a couple of fortuitous bounces, he's there as well. Up go the arms. Now here's a sighting as rare as that of an osprey. Wigan's Colin Clark takes the goal kick and pots it straight between the sticks, but Balmain still won the day 9-8. In 1968, the Australians won the World Cup in front of their own fans. The British were frankly disappointing, losing to the Aussies 25-10 in their first game in front of a packed house at Sydney. But this was the first time the Australians had had a live view of Roger the Dodger. Little Roger Millward, who moved to Hull KR because of limited opportunities in the shadows of Hardisty and Hepworth at Weldon Road. Millward revealed the full bag of tricks in creating this try for Ian Brooke of Wakefield Trinity. And this was the World Cup in which another great British name came to the fore, that of Clive Sullivan, a true gentleman of the sport, later to be honoured with the MBE. The British did enjoy their attacking moments, but just found it too difficult to break through. And they didn't always get the bounce of the ball either. But from this dropout, watch out for a unique type of try. The dominance actually came to something. but it takes a remarkable effort on the part of Clive Sullivan. Here's the ball going out. Now, see how Sullivan takes it, and then just look at the pace. He's like a gazelle. Sullivan over, and that is a very rare type of try indeed. And Roger Millward, one of the first to congratulate him. Actually, Millward was embarking on a truly magnificent career. He became part of rugby league folklore, winning all the game's principal honours as a player and as a coach. And as that other prolific point scorer, David Watkins, says, he had a significant impact on the game.
Well, Roger Millward, I mean, I make no secret of it. I mean, I came into rugby league football in '67, and I was lambasted, I suppose, in the early part of my career on saying how many great players were in the game. Every standoff I played against when I was playing standoff for Salford was rated as the greatest player that ever played rugby league. You had Willie Aspinall, you had Tommy Warburton, you had Frankie Myler, you had Alex Murphy, you had Alan Hardesty, Mick Shoebottom, and everybody was talking. But the one player, as far as I'm concerned, that emerged as a truly great player in my playing career in rugby league football was Roger Millward, because not only was he was small in stature, but big in heart and guts and determination. But not only that, he had something which nobody else had, and that was a skill to drift in and drift out of a game, to dictate a game. And the when you went out on a tour in '74 and you had to listen to Australians talking, and you appreciated just how great a player he was, because if they feared anybody at all, it was really Roger Millward.
But as Frank Myler well knows and is about to reveal, no matter how great the players are, they do need moulding together, humouring sometimes, and this is where the role of the manager is so vital.
The two tours that I won, and I have always said the importance of having a good tour manager, and on both the '66 and '70 tours we did have two good managers. And on the '71, of course, we had John Whiteley, who was coach, who was a great player, you know, in his day, and a great coach, and knew what it was all about, and John certainly was on that '70 tour, you know. Because we were a very young side. I mean, I was 31 at the time, but I think the average age of that touring side was about 24. You had likes of Dougie Lawton coming on the scene, Roger Millward, Riley. These fellas were only 20, 21, Jimmy Thompson. And the thing was that they never ever played, I think there was only two who's ever played against the Australians in test matches, and I think if you ask players that have played in test matches that, you know, that to play against the Australians, it's a little bit of a different game. It's not the same as a cup final or anything. There's something different about it. The extra tension from the media, certainly in Australia, and obviously wanting to win badly for your country, and you know, there's a lot of pressure on you as regards of that. And with us being a young side in '70, with the lack of experience of playing against the Australians, you know, was certainly in that first test match was, you know, something that led to our downfall.
The first test in Brisbane turned out to be a disaster for Great Britain. They were soon 11 points down by the time Cliff Watson scored this try. That gave the British a lift, and there was a goal to come too from the boot, the golden boot as he was known, of Welshman Terry Price. This was the first time a test match had been played under the new 4-tackle rule. The Australians 11-5 ahead there, and Johnny Whiteley, the British coach, with an anxious look on his face. John Atkinson thought he'd made a good interception try, but there he'd just put his foot in touch, and the eagle-eyed touch judge made sure that Atkinson had been wasting his energy. There was the offending moment. The Australians relied heavily on the boot of Graham Langlands. He kicked 9 goals. But here are the better moments for the British, and this is their second try coming up now, scored by the Hull KR hooker, Flash Flanagan. But there wasn't really much to cheer on this occasion for the touring team. Their third and last try came from the Wigan forward, Dougie Lawton, but it came much too late to alter the result of the match. Here's Lawton going in under the posts. The crowd of 42,807, though, stayed to the end to cheer an Australian victory. This was a demoralising defeat for Johnny Whiteley's side. No wonder the Australian crowd wanted to invade the pitch. They'd seen a major triumph for their team. The final score, Australia 37, Great Britain 15. Amazingly, the British rallied to take the second test thanks to the mercurial Millward, who scored 2 tries and kicked 7 goals. Yet again, the Ashes were to be resolved at Sydney. This was the scene of yet another unforgettable Lions performance. Although the scores were always close, the tourists were streets ahead, scoring 5 tries to 1. The first when McKean's clearance was charged down by the massive figure of Dennis Hartley, who plunged his way to the line and earned the congratulations of his colleagues. Millward's goal made it 7-6, McKean having already landed 3 penalties. There was a strong Leeds influence in the touring team, with the 1, 2, 3 and 5 berths all filled by men from Headingley, Shoebottom, Smith, Hines and Atkinson. And it was Atkinson who intercepted Beatson's ambitious pass to canter over for the sort of try he'd been denied at Brisbane. And what a leap! The effervescent Millward was there to pat him on the back. And you can bet he was there again when Sid Hines followed up Malcolm Reilly's rather vigorous approach to storm over. Another gleeful moment for the tourists. The Aussies were staggered, only McKean's goals keeping them in the hunt. Shoebottom, one of 3 different fullbacks used in the series, in fact all 26 tourists got 1 game in at least in a test, made a telling break to set up his Leeds pal Atkinson again. And the Ashes were almost won. Even when Australia did score, though, there looked to be a distinct offside. Watch how McCarthy seems to be in front of the ball when he gets it. There he is, but he does salvage some pride for the home side. The fans ecstatic, and the goal kick to come from McKean, who's really had his shooting boots on. Not this time, though, and a golden opportunity of putting his side ahead goes begging. Despair for McKean. Suitably, it was the dashing Millward who clinched Britain's victory with a try he'll always treasure. There had been nobody better on the tour than Roger Millward. Here he goes, and there's no stopping Roger the Dodger as he scampers away. No wonder he leaps into the air and into the arms of his teammates, no doubt grateful it wasn't a front row forward who'd taken the glory. And a 21-17 scoreline barely reflected Britain's superiority, but victory just as sweet for Frank Myler and his jubilant team of stars. For once the Australian crowd had been silenced, but even they sportingly applauded a side that will go down in history as one of Britain's best. The lap of honour thoroughly deserved. A marvellous moment for Myler, the Ashes on their way back to England. Chris Hesketh became the 3rd Salford player to lead the Lions on tour in 1974. David Watkins again.
The tour had its problems before it started because 6 of the best players that we could have had who would have been obvious selections were already contracted to play out in Australia that summer, and they were Mal Reilly, there was Lockwood, Lowe, Dougie Lawton, Stevenson, and I mean, without these players to start with, I mean, we were going to have a tough time.
Those problems manifested themselves in the opening test at Brisbane, although there were only 2 new British caps, John Bevan of Warrington and Jim Mills of Widnes, against 3 new boys in the Aussie lineup. It was a low-scoring game. Langlands kicked a goal for Australia. Terry Clausen responded by thumping over this prodigious effort for the touring team. But the Australians did piece together the best passing move of the game. They refused to let the ball die, working it through the hands with the British desperately hanging on. But it seemed a score just had to come. And when it did, it was one of the new caps, with the very Australian name of Warren Orr of Wests. Here he is, and he strolls over for what proved to be the game's only try. Australia in a lead which they never were to lose. Britain's only hope at this stage seemed to be through the boot of Oldham's Clawson. He kicked a lot of goals in his career with Featherstone Rovers, Bradford Northern and Oldham. And again, he's on target here to peg the score back to Australia 7, Great Britain 4. That one through the middle, and when Great Britain got another chance soon afterwards, Clawson was to hand over the responsibility to David Watkins. A much simpler kick, and Dye didn't miss. But it was all too little too late. Australia nosed in front in the series, 12-6 the final score. The series was lost 2-1, so when the Kangaroos came over in '78, British pride badly needed restoring. Coach Peter Fox looked on as Captain Roger Millward went down the line at Odsal before the second test, the first at Central Park having been lost 15-9. Men like Jim Mills, Tony Fisher, Brian Lockwood, George Nichols, Phil Lowe and Steve Norton formed a formidable pack in those days. And the referee, Mick Norton of Widnes, probably knew he was in for a lively afternoon. 3 goals by George Fairbairn against 2 by Mick Cronin kept Britain just in front, and then the game's first try. Millward's diagonal kick sees Stuart Wright react the quickest. The merest of touches is enough. George Fairbairn has been kicking well. The Scot in tremendous form, both for club and country. But here comes a little bit of a wobbler. Perhaps symbolic, though, of Britain's luck on the day, it finds its way straight through the middle. Britain's only debutant on this occasion was Castleford's John Joyner playing in the centre, and the selector's faith is repaid when Joyner's skill and pace sparks the move that sees Wright joyfully over for his second try. Delight for the Widnes wingman, and Britain go up 18-4. The Aussies won't lie down, though. And with 5 minutes of the game remaining, this high kick seems to fool Fairbairn for once. It's one of those moments he must still recall with dread. Ray Price pounces to score for the Kangaroos. Steve Rogers converted this time, and then right on the stroke of time, Rogers himself was sent speeding over in the corner. For the final score, 18-14, a little flattering to the Australians, though the British were no doubt glad to hear the final whistle. The Aussies clinched the series at Leeds. Dougie Lawton now of Widnes led the 1979 Lions, coached by Eric Ashton.
The nucleus of the side, the thing that went wrong for us in '79 was the nucleus of the side was the 2 half-backs, Nash and Millward, and the captain Dougie Lawton, and Jim Mills, and Knocker Norton, the experienced players who'd played quite a number of test matches and never played a test match. Always injured. Went out with injuries, must have gone out with injuries. There was no physical check-up, it was just selected, no tour trials, no preparation whatsoever. And it didn't help us. Showed great character after being battered, literally battered in Australia, that we can go over to New Zealand, lads tired and weary, long tour, and pick ourselves up again. And win the series, and could quite easily won all 3 test matches then.
After humiliation in the first test at Brisbane, the British caned 35-0, 4 changes were made for Sydney, with Jeff Gratian and Mick Adams brought in for the first time. Nonetheless, that man Rogers was soon scorching over for the game's first try. The match turned into a personal triumph for Parramatta's Mick Cronin. That's an excellent score. And Cronin was to go on to land 6 goals as well. When chance presented itself once more, there was Cronin scrambling over for his second and the team's 3rd try. Britain did buck up a little in the second half, gave themselves renewed hope. A very, very good break indeed, first of all from George Nichols. And the support is from John Joyner, who burrows his way through the middle for a try which John Woods improved, making the score then 17-14 to Australia. Better still was to come for the touring team. Eric Hughes, that enterprising witness back, hacked on. And then the normally impeccable Graham Eady at full-back is harried into a mistake. Hughes claims the touchdown himself. He's delighted, but it's the Aussies who have the final say. Red Rocket Reddy lives up to his nickname, and the Aussies complete a whitewash, a feat they were to repeat in 1982. There were fears of another one when Bradford's Brian Noble led the 84 team down under. With the Australians seemingly invincible around this period, coach Frank Myler was really praying for miracles.
They give 100%, and if a side gives you 100%, you can't ask for any more. But what we lacked basically great players. I'm not saying there wasn't any great players on that side, but I think Australia at that time had a freakish team. They had 6 or 7 all-time greats.
Despite going 3-0 down in the series, Great Britain did have the satisfaction of conjuring up some of the best tries. Des Drummond here showing his tremendous pace. And the support comes from Gary Schofield, at 18, the youngest tourist to score a try. And in the second test in Brisbane, a try to rank with those in any era. The ball whipping through the hands, and again Des Drummond involved. In fact, he'll be involved twice, and this man, Gary Schofield, will be involved 3 times. Here's Drummond again. Now Andy Goodway. And now Schofield. A superb score. This series featured the introduction of Ellery Hanley to Great Britain-Australia matches. The man, a modern phenomenon, showing his power. From Australia, the touring team went on to New Zealand and the mud of Christchurch. But once again, it couldn't stop Hanley. A tremendous surge to the line for the man from Bradford Northern. Nork and the mud stopped the next try. Myler was involved, and here he is again, for one of the easiest scores of the tour. Still in New Zealand, but moving on now to Auckland. Here's Oldham's Terry Flanagan. The move carried on by Andy Gregory, and it's that man Hanley again. He's got his back to the try line, but that doesn't seem to stop him. How on earth did he find a way through there? The try stands. And a try coming up now of a pretty rare variety. It's scored in the end by Bradford Northern fullback Keith Mumby, who just happens to be in the right spot at the right time. Back home in 1986, the Australians won 3-0 yet again. But once more, some of the better tries were scored by Great Britain. And here's another one for that man Gary Schofield. The Old Trafford crowd really appreciating that, and Schofield developing a knack of scoring tries against the Australians. And what about this for a try? Just look at the blistering pace of Joe Lydon. Even when Gary Jack, who's no slouch himself, comes over, Lydon has the pace to beat him in the corner. The fans are going wild. And there was still another score to come. This time it's the pack that paved the way, and that big man from Hull, Lee Crooks, involved. He it is who slips the final ball, having made the burst. Guess who's there? Gary Schofield. But the match was lost, and so to the final test match at Wigan. And a great burst through the middle from Myler, and it seems to be becoming a testimonial for Gary Schofield. And now the final one in this sequence of tries, all of them good ones though. The sort to get the crowd really on their feet. And here the ball moving along the line, and well, I thought it might be. It's Gary Schofield, a real modern-day star. The memories of successes and failures come flooding back as the reunion gathering shows its collective respect and admiration for the greats of the past. Men whose deeds will never be forgotten thanks to the record books, and whose names will be etched forever in rugby league history. Men like former Lions captain Gus Risman. Greatness will always be acknowledged, and there's a genuine warmth towards the oldest surviving Lions member, Harold Young, who was Bradford Northern's first ever tourist in 1928. Fellow tourist in 1928 and a return visitor to Australia 4 years later was Alf Ellaby. They all look back on a golden past, and these British Lions also look forward to a new era when successors in the most coveted jersey of all will carry on the finest traditions of the game.